DESIblitz.com.
But yeah, so it's like she's, mangoes are really erotic, and it just sort of like plays into her identity and the way that she communicates with people. So it's supposed to be quite a fun, light, like I say, a sensual piece that then ends with, hopefully, with people eating mangoes. So I'm really excited to get like white people in the university in Washington to like eat mangoes a proper desi way.
But did you find proper desi mangoes, or are you pulling out the green ones and going, guys, eat your green mangoes?
No, I'm forcing them to buy like desi mangoes. I'm like, so I need like 5 or 6 boxes at least for the first show. And they're like, okay.
Where do we source these from?
And it is, I think they're still like semi-illegal to like import into the US, or some mangoes are. So there's like, you have to find like the uncle in the newsagents that has it like, behind the curtains. Yeah.
So you have a mango poem which is really playful and fun in your collection, haven't you?
I've got quite a few poems that refer to mangoes, ironically, because I had this massive like issue with, it's so funny, with South Asian poets using mangoes as like a marker for like love and anything to do with like the homeland. Everything was like mangofied, right? So I was like, oh my god, this is so funny and ironic, and then really decided to write a whole play based on it.
So that was the other thing that was really amazing, because normally when I perform in certain spaces, everybody's like, wow, that's an amazing poem about a bindi. That's incredible. And then when I was in a room with you and Amani and Sharifa, you were like, guys, what the hell are you doing? What is this poem about a mango? What is this poem about bindi? Come on. And I think we really forced ourselves out of our comfort zones and did something that was playful and experimental and turned things on their head. And I think because we had that support from one another, we were able to see from a perspective where we're like, everybody knows this story. How can we tell it in a different way? So I think that was that. But I remember you going off on this thing like mangoes, and then suddenly you're like, but yeah, mangoes.
I think I just realized that, as much as I want to distance myself from it, I can't do it. There's no way. There's no way. But what's the project that you're working on then?
Zena Edwards is an incredible poet and does a lot of work around eco poetry and climate injustice. And in the last 2 years, I've gotten really involved in a project with Kate Fairwell called the Siren Poets. And we started to do work commissioned with scientists and leaders in terms of looking at climate injustice, the impact of climate injustice. And I got caught up, of course, being South Asian, and now I'm technically speaking almost an auntie, food, because I'm just like, I feed everyone, so let's talk about food. And looking at climate injustice from the point of view of food. Also, like, I'm Punjabi. I'm always like, Punjabis are like this. I'm Punjabi, all right? So farming is a huge part of our culture. We come from farming communities. And so I thought I really got caught up in this idea of wanting to explore climate injustice from the point of view of consumption. So when we did the workshops with Zena, I was really inspired by Zena's actual work and the things that she spoke about in her creativity, and then was inspired to do that project with Sirens. So we've got a show that we're touring currently, and I'm working with an amazing musician called Pete Yalding, who's a celloist as well, and just looking at food stories, but also climate injustice and the larger global impact of who's being affected. And just looking at the past few months, it is huge, and it's every day, and it's something's happening in some part of the world where people are losing their homes. And I think it's such a huge, overwhelming subject. And when we think of climate change, you're just like, well, it's the end of the world, there's nothing we can do, and capitalism's won, and it is. And I think what I really want to do is talk about it from the small kind of, what teeny tiny little things can we all each do, and how do we get over this idea of guilt and feeling overwhelmed by it? What can we do individually? And that is things like eating locally sourced and trying to be, frugal in the way in which we use and consume food, which is, especially like coming from South Asian backgrounds, we know how to do that, so there's skills that have been passed along, like, dal is such a fundamental part of like our cuisine, and it is, generally speaking, very, very climate friendly. And if you look at a lot of our foods, they are kind of in keeping with what you can have in your local environments. You can make a curry out of anything, literally. Like when I'm at home and I'm like, oh, I've got no food in the cupboards, I can just go, okay, I've got an egg, I've got a mango, I've got a bit of chili. There we go. We're going to make a curry, and you can make a curry out of anything, and it's delicious. But you don't have to break the bank. You don't have to go out and constantly buying foods. And I think that's the kind of point of view I wanted to come at, because I think climate justice is huge. There's so many different aspects. If you look at clothing and there's so many different ways in which, carbon footprint, if we're talking about travel, etc. So there's so many things that kind of overwhelm us, and I just want to take one small aspect, talk about it from that point of view, and also make sure that's like our voices are included in this, because I feel like a lot of people from the global south or from heritages of that part of the world, we have histories and customs and traditions that are very much in keeping with the natural environment and the natural world. Capitalism, of course, is the opposite of that. And I feel like our voices are disappearing sometimes in movements. Like I feel like Extinction Rebellion are trying to engage with those voices, but don't necessarily know the best way of going about it. But I feel like there's a real rich history and culture that we can talk about, and we can say, look, we have been doing this for so many years. Why can't we go back to doing X, Y, and Z? Because there is no planet B. That's yes. So that's the work I've been doing. So not necessarily mangoes, maybe a bit more about dal. But yeah, so that's been my focus in the last few years.
And food is like pretty, because like your poetry collection is called Jam is for Girls, Girls Get Jam. Do you want to talk about where that title comes from or what?
Okay. So I mean, we had this conversation before this thing. We were like, okay, so what do you think you're going to perform, Afshan? What do you think you're going to perform, Shagufta? And both of us were like, we should perform Jam is for Girls, and we should perform Mother Tongue, because that is our work, and that's what we're known for. So Jam is for Girls, Girls Get Jam, my poetry collection, is very much about food politics. So being Punjabi, we come from a farming background, and we used to have a farm, and the men would go out and they'd work in the fields and they'd do all the labor and the hard work. And then they would come home and they would eat the best bits of meat, the best bits of eggs for breakfast, because they needed to sustain their strength. But the women were working just as hard in the farm and maintaining the homes. It wasn't easy at all. But when we came to the UK, everyone, the older generation would say, oh, you're very lucky you're eating eggs for breakfast. In Pakistan, we used to eat jam, or the girls would eat all the vegetables. They didn't get the meat because it was for the men. And I remember being like quite young and being like, oh my God, that is so sexist. I'm going to be a feminist now. And that's when I was 13. So I decided I'm going to be a feminist because everyone keeps telling me I should be eating jam and not eggs. Even though I preferred jam over eggs, I was like, I'm going to make a point here and just do it to make a point. So that's where the title came from. That's where the title poem is based around food. So yeah, I think I'm quite obsessed with food, I'd say. Yeah, Shan. Yeah.
I feel you, man. Do you want to read out Jam is for Girls?
I think I should do it. I was going to get you to do a mango one, but okay, you've got me doing it. Let's go first. So Jam is for Girls, Girls Get Jam. Jam is for girls, girls get jam, but we awoke to the sizzle of eggs in the pan. I liked mine well done, and my sister liked hers with the yolk, just so. Yes, we were girls, but we got eggs, not jam, but we were made to know. I was not born boy. I was not born to be man. I was born to be given away, and that's why girls get jam. And that's why I have not one, but three beautiful sisters, because I was not born boy. And I was made to know that I escaped the desert sands. My mouth was not placed over with hand. I was lucky enough to be born after the gift of the Quran, to be protected by the word of Allah. And still my ummah does not hear the compassion bestowed upon us by Allah. Still my ummah chooses not to see the light bestowed upon us by Allah. Yes, bones lie scattered, crisscrossing through deserts under the feet of our beloved prophets. And like my mother, the desert heat suppresses secrets, and mass graves gather under sand dunes. No, I cannot tell you where that girl child buried, breathing, lies in the embrace of the Sahara. And yes, I must cover live enshrouded, black cloth grazing against my skin, protecting me from everyone else's sins, my face, my eyes, my lips, my words, my honesty, and yet I must pluck, and I must wax, and I must tweeze and squeeze and polish and lipo and smile for lips, big tits, designer, vagina, because this way it gets called freedom. You see, my identity and my honor lie not in me, but in those who own me, and oh, how they adorn me. I tinsel like a Christmas tree. Purple bruises sparkle against my face because in the land of the free, by the man I love, I am battered every 15 seconds. And in the land of democracy, I was only given the right to speak in 1918. Shh. Yes, they tell me to hush because only in 1991 did it get called rape. So don't say a word, they say. Don't say a word, don't question it. But I've got to ask, is that why even today only 4.2% of rape cases lead to conviction in Bristol? Yes, I said 4.2% of rape cases lead to conviction in Bristol. They just all let him walk away because I was not born boy. I was not born to be man. I was born to be given away. And that's why girls get jammed. And they call us traitors because we give away land. We do not carry on our fathers' names. We disappear in family trees. No one can trace who we are. There is no leaf left for me. In as silent as sweltering heavy nights, we are considered to have come from thin air, giving birth to strong sons and serving great husbands and burning to death on funeral pyres. The Ganges just rolling on by. I'm perturbed by that smell of burning flesh, that stench of charred hair that once tumbled down a honey brown back. They remind us. We got lumbered with jam. We were born to be given away. And no one loves those who aren't here to stay. Jam is for girls. Old and oldie.
Every time I hear that, it's been so long since I've heard you perform that. It's so like, oh, I absolutely love it.
I think whenever we would go touring, there was always like the go-to poem that everybody would perform, and we knew each other's poems. So sometimes I remember people would be sat there going, yes, because they knew the next line coming. Oh, yes, I know the next line coming. So Amani had one that I remember she used to do all the time. And I remember a line from it where she talks about a picture frame falling on the floor and the fish just spreading out across the glass. Yeah, I love that. So I'm going to have to ask you to do a mango poem. I know you can do mother tongue, but let's do a mango poem because we've just done.
What I'll do is I'll perform / read an extract of the monologue as it currently sits from How to Make Mangoes. I haven't done this in a long time, so we'll see how it goes. But it goes like this. They call me a Rishta auntie. Auntie, a woman over 25 who is not married. Rishta, a relationship making me a matchmaking auntie. But really, I just teach the young how to eat mangoes. If your lover picks up the mango and looks for a knife, he's not to be trusted. There is a proper way to eat a mango. First, find a mango. There are too many varieties to name, and just like people, each one is unique, giving a slightly different flavor and taste. You have African mangoes, larger in size, tougher skin, sweeter and more fibrous in texture, almost muscular in nature, the kind that you often find chopped up and sealed in plastic cartons in Marks and Spencer's. Pakistani mangoes have a nuttier taste, skin that rips apart upon touching it, often pulped for lassi or smoothies, sold in bulk, smuggled across oceans in boxes for diaspora that long to connect with a homeland that refuses to acknowledge them. Then we have Indian mangoes, similar to Pakistani mangoes, but sweeter. I'm slightly biased. When you press your thumb against the skin, it will leave an indent, a mark you were once there. They're often likened to saffron, once sold for the same price from uncles in supermarkets who know that the diaspora can't get enough of three things: saffron, gold, and mangoes. You then have some mangoes named after colonizers, but unlike the colonizers, they are rich, creamy, tender in texture and delicate. They are juicy in a way that the colonizer is not and can never be. Choose your mangoes carefully. Make sure they are ripe enough to be molded by your hands, but not so ripe that the very Western countries that once colonized you impose importing bans. Hold your mango in one hand and then watch him, your potential lover. Look how he picks up a mango. He has never known the touch of a lover, and you can tell. The way he squeezes the fruit to check its ripeness. His fingers have not yet experienced tenderness, nor his body. He was taught not to love, but to fuck, as boys are taught to grab and pull, and girls are taught to take it. Mangoes don't need to be treated as such. Gently roll in your hands between your fingers and thumb and press on the flesh, breaking down the inner structure until it feels like the bosom of the lover that taught you intimacy. Then, once you are satisfied, ask permission before covering the tip with your mouth. Rip the top off with your teeth, and if you're more sophisticated than that, use your fingers. Release the heat within and let the juices ooze for a moment. See how long you can let it drip down your arm before you have the urge to lick it clean. You must learn to be comfortable with the messiness. Mango etiquette requires it. Then, my child, you suck. The experts will know exactly how and when to squeeze in order to have the right amount squirt into your mouth. The amateurs may use a plate to catch the mango that drips. Wasting mango is a sin. Once sucked dry, peel open the skin. Use your fingers to pry the stone out. See the flesh that clings onto the hairs of the stone? That's the best bit. Don't forget the skin. There's mango there too. Once finished, look down at the mess that you've created. The mango that was once supple and full is now a carcass of skin and stone, and that, my child, is how you find a lover. The only men worth spreading your legs for are the ones who bite off the end and suck the insides. Only the ones who know how to chew on the stone should be let into your bed. While men may lie, mangoes do not. Let the peel pattern of the skin dictate to you his position. I made the mistake of marrying one who'd carried a knife for such occasions. I mistook his preparation for thrill. Instead, I spent nights falsely calling for God and shaking my body while the earth stayed flat, his body stayed flat, my mind flat. He was good with his words, but his tongue, not so much. Switch your cut-up, pre-packaged mangoes for fresh, whole ones. Maybe then you'll stop loving in English, a distant vanilla love. Maybe then you will dream of sequins on velvet. Maybe, just maybe, you'll find a lover worth loving. Until then, you'll have mangoes to keep you company. Go on, find a mango. I should have warned before.
I should have brought a mango with me. I should have been eating a mango while you were performing that. Amazing.
Oh my God.
Mangoes do not, he will lie, but mangoes will never lie.
Let the peel pattern dictate to you. Yeah, I always forget how, I'm blushing now because of how sensual that is. I always forget how sensual that piece is and forget to warn people before. People are like, oh my God, is she saying what I think she's saying?
Yes.
No, I love it. It's yeah, that's the piece that I'll be hopefully making into a longer sort of monologue, and that will be one of the moments that the characters having with the mangoes privately, maybe before or during the show, once it's written. But yeah.
I like the intro that auntie is anybody over the age of 25.
Yeah.
Yes.
Obviously. we're both technically aunties now, Shagufta.
Yeah.
That's it. We're
almost granny now, really. Yes. So we are going to take questions. So in about 10 or so minutes, we're going to take a Q&A. So if you've got any questions to ask Afshan about her work or myself about my work, please do use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to do so. And we'll answer as much as we possibly can in the lead up to 9 o'clock, which will be where we end this. I was going to say this show, but it's kind of like a really important. I really wish you were in my living room. That'd been really nice. Yes,
so it's like a mini Mushaira, isn't it? Going back and forth. I quite like it.
It is, yes. So I was going to ask you a little bit about Naz and Santi, because that did really well at Vault, and I get the impression it was sold out as well, because I remember trying to book onto it and I was like, oh, it's all sold out. So tell me a little bit, because I mean that's a bit different from the poetry. It's going into, and you're doing it here as well with the monologue, sort of diving into script and a little bit about theatre work. And just, I know you've always kind of dabbled between the two. You've also been a sort of poet theatre maker, but tell us a bit about Santi and Naz.
So the play is set during partition of India and Pakistan in Punjab, actually, and it's written with my co-writer Gulran Amir, who I'm currently writing a TV series with. So watch the space for that. So it's about two women who are best friends and who essentially partition tears apart. There's one of the things that we realized was a lot of partition stories forefronted the partition and was very much about like war and violence and men. And we were like, what about the women? What about all the women that were displaced? What about all the women that existed? We don't see them anywhere in any of the stories. And if they do, then, you know, there's a romantic storyline with a man in there that kind of, you know, takes, you've all seen the Bollywood films, that sort of like come at the forefront. And then you've got war. So what we've done with the play is we've kind of had partition running in the underneath, and we've taken what is like two, you know, young girls, 14, 15 years old, sort of, as young girls do, messing about, playing about, you know, pretending to be Muhammad Ali Jinnah, pretending to be Gandhi, you know, and we were able to play with what it was like to be a child at that time and what it's like to lose a friend. So essentially it's about friendship and loyalty and about how far you would go to save your friend or how far your friend would go to save you. That's the play. We won a Vault Award, a debut award, which is really, really fun. And we're hoping to tour it from, I think, next autumn. It's a beautiful little two-hander that, I mean, the actresses were phenomenal in the show last year. So I'm hoping that we can use them again for the next sharing. But you write about partition as well, right?
I do. I guess we all do in some shape or form. And I think I have explored that and talked about it in my work. But mostly from I think I've got a really short poem called Empire and talk about it from, I think I do a lot of work around female body politics and state violence against women's bodies. So I've got a poem that's a poetry film, which is called Borders. So that's about recent migration and violence against women's bodies. And then I've got another poem called Empire, which is about sort of the relationship between male and female, and then sort of having that as a way of talking about the relationship between India and Britain. I feel like I'm talking around it, so it's a short poem. So I'll just share it while people are thinking of questions that they may have. So it's called Empire. I was doing all right until I met him. Needy, complicated, full of drama. It was small man syndrome. It was upbringing. He was misunderstood. He was an island. He needed to be given a chance. And everyone said he would be cruel. But it happened so slow. And then suddenly it was 200 years of sorrow that sat into my bones, sat into the salt of me. I had let him hold my face in his hands, whisper in my ears, let him mute the spice of me. He slipped heirlooms off my nakedness, fingers, neck, wrists, ankles exposed. He put his dick into the soil of me. I bore the children he denied. He drew lines across my body, broke me into nationless pieces. He gave me a blade and he sat and watched blood flow. He waited. He waited for me to become all teeth, or nails, or bones. Yeah, so that's my partition poem. And it's, I feel like I should have done a trigger warning at the start of this. I'm sorry, we're poets. We just go straight in with this, don't we? I know it's really important for poets to do things like trigger warnings. Trigger warnings, there is violence, there is heavy poet stuff going on in here. Afshan and I do that quite, and I do this in conversations with people as well. I'm just like, let's talk about this thing. And then people are like, that's too much information. Stop. We just met. I'm walking away from it, this bus stop. So yes, that's my poem about partition. I feel like, Afshan, we've spoken a fair bit about your mother's mother tongue poem, but we haven't heard the mother's mother tongue poem. I'm going to see if I could try and chip in the background with a line as a chorus girl, because I feel like I know the poem.
Yeah, do it. So it's a poem that I wrote for my mum because she asked me to write a poem about her. And it goes like this. It's called Mother Tongue.
Didn't she say, Afshan, I'm tired of you always writing about sex. Can you please write a poem about me? You're obliged to write. So.
She did say that. And weirdly, it's one of those poems that I wrote for her, and it's probably my most performed poem and my most like well-known poem from people. So it's a really obscure thing that I'm like, oh look, my mum was right all along. I did this most recently in Mexico, so there's a bit of Spanish in it, so I'm going to keep it in because why not? That's always fun. Mother tongue. La lengua madre de mi madre Konkani, but she uses my father's language at home. We have to, because having multilingual arguments in the house would confuse MI5, and wow, we're just too kind for that. So instead we speak Urdu, a language of love, a language of poets, but all my mother ever hears are the butchered slang words young boys sling at each other on the bus. My mother's mother tongue is Konkani, but outside the house she uses English. God forbid anyone thinks she is a freshie. She's learnt to not roll her R's and use only sparingly, but still she gets asked, darling, where are you really from? She hears cheap imitations of voice she's tried so hard to shake on TV and film, and it reminds her of what she sounds like to the rest of them. My mother's mother tongue is Konkani, but sometimes she speaks Hindi, like when we're out shopping and talking about the guy who just queued in front of us. She smiles when she speaks it, head up, proud, brings her closer to home. But then she has to revert back to the language of the colonizer to finish the sale, and suddenly her head lowers. My mother's mother tongue is Konkani, but the only time she ever speaks it is to her mother on Sunday mornings. I watch her struggle. Sometimes she tries to remember the word for fruits and replaces it with English or Urdu. She blames it on her growing age, but I know that she's forgotten. Mujhe maich bas Konkani, and so should mine be. I dread the day my grandmother passes, for I'm afraid my mother will lose her tongue. She won't speak with proudness or chat back with slickness. And my mother's tongue, it will feel foreign in her mouth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So you got the Spanish in there as well. Nice. Very So we're now open to taking questions. So if you've got any questions you want to ask, either about Jams for Girls, Girls Get Jam, or Redesire, or any of the work that we're currently working on, please feel free to drop something into the Q&A box, because I think that's separate from the chat box. And I think while you're coming to us with questions, I do think there's a couple more questions I had for you myself as well. Just because it's been such a long time since because I know you're involved a fair bit with the Manchester poetry scene, and I think so far whenever we think about the poetry scene, it's quite big in London, and it's really nice to see DESIblitz doing something locally in Birmingham, because Birmingham's poetry scene's really kind of come into the forefront, and you've got some amazing poets like Rupinder Kaur, you've got Adrian Earl, I can see their face
as well. Nafisa Hamid, who's based.
Yeah, but very powerful works from Nafisa. Amira, you've got Amira, who was one of the co-founders of Verve. Yes, and so it's got a really big poetry scene there in Birmingham. But something obviously very similar is happening in Manchester. So you've got yourself, you've got Hafsa, and you've got the poet, and I've totally forgotten her name. It's gone out of my head. I can see them. Basketball player as well as
Asma Al-Badawi.
Yes. So yeah, talk about a little about the Manchester poetry scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar. Well, it's very different and very similar to London in that, like, there's a lot going on, but I feel like Manchester has more of a DIY scene to it, whereas London seems to be, a lot of the poetry scene seems to be like linked to established organizations and institutions. Manchester's poetry scene is pretty, like, everywhere. Everyone's doing it everywhere. There was one point pre-lockdown where there were like 3 or 4 poetry nights a night. You could just like open up the website or, Facebook and type in like open mic, and you'd find somewhere to perform to, which is great as a budding poet because you're just seeing poetry. And I don't know how you find it, but when I'm in a poetry audience, I write while I'm there as well. I do this like, oh my God, that's a great line. Let me steal it. Let me borrow it.
People are like, why are you going? So I'm inspired by you. I'm inspired. Yes.
But I'm guessing it's the same in Bristol, because I think Bristol and Manchester both have that do-it-yourself vibe to it, and they're both kind of ignored cities compared to London. The amount of like funding and energy that goes into London, because you've started Kiota as well in Bristol. So I want to talk a little bit about
Yeah. So I guess it's quite similar with Bristol being quite DIY, like Manchester. But I think because we're so close to London, we do get a bit lazy and we rely on London. So we can kind of, I'm like that as well. I do bounce between the two cities. But we kind of are the hub in the Southwest. And so there's a big spoken word scene, a big poetry scene. Kiota came about because while there is a big spoken word scene, people of color who are artists don't necessarily have that support system in place. And so Kiota was set up to give any artist from any discipline, whether it's your spoken word poet, the dancer, musician, to come together, and we create residencies for you to collaborate and create something slightly outside of your comfort zone, but for poets to work or artists to work out of isolation, because you're always on your own when you're writing and creating. So it's great to be in a collaborative space. I can see there's a question that's come up, and I'm gonna put it to you because you briefly touched upon it when you're talking about open mic nights, but somebody called Tam has said, brilliant work. Yes, brilliant work. Loved it. What would you advise someone trying to break into the poetry scene? So what kind of advice would you?
I think networks are really important. And by networks, I don't mean networking, but like your community of poets, your community of writers, other artists that can, tell you if something's really bad or something's really good, people to collaborate with. And I've been really lucky in that I've been a part of quite a few different schemes, playwriting and poetry. I've been a part of like Universe and other poetry events in Manchester and elsewhere. And now globally sort of like a fellow. So my community of artists that I can ring up or that are on my WhatsApp that I can just be like, yo, I want to do this thing. Are you up for like collaborating? Has been amazing. And I think it meant that at the very beginning of my like career, and I say career because like I'm still proving to my mum that this is a career, without the inverted commas. Beginning of my career, I really struggled to find. I felt really like siloed, and you're talking about it. It's such an alienating experience sometimes to write by yourself, and I find performing to be not alienating. Even if I'm only on my own on stage, there's a relationship that I create with my other people that are performing with me, but also the audience and everybody else listening. So for me, there's something about being able to use those moments, those opportunities of open mic, there's opportunities with playwriting schemes and fellows and whatever else you're doing to find friends, essentially. So I just basically was like, yeah, let's be a poet because I can make friends better than I could do if I was like an accountant or something.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very particular kind of group that you get and you're like, yes, we match. I think I kind of second everything you're saying. I think open mics are great if you want to kind of get out there and use an audience, like just hearing how your work sounds, hearing how your work falls into an audience. You edit as you go along. And I think sometimes you're like, yeah, this really works. And then you take it and you perform it and you think, no, actually I need to tweak it like this. And I think taking your work outside is a really important part of it. I like the idea of working and collaborating with others. I think that's important too. But definitely utilize the open mics, and also I'd say read poets. I think that's something a lot of people don't do, and then get caught up into sort of hashing statements or things that we hear constantly, whereas I think there are some poets whose work I read and they make me see something in a completely different way, or they describe something. I'm like, they described this thing like this. How can you do those two images together? But they did it, and it's amazing. So there are incredible poets out there who, I think people should be reading and looking at those works as a kind of benchmark. And seeing how people are experimental and playful as well on performance poetry, not just being performative in a live space, but also on written text. So Adrian Earl is somebody whose work I love, because Adrian will make you read a poetry collection doing this. It's so interactive. It's just, and the other poet who I'm thinking is the American poet. Is it Fatima Ashko? Amazing poetry again. She's got the bingo poet, and really playful with form, really experimental. And I think those are kind of things that we, as poets, if we want to further our interest and further our talent and experience and our finding our voice, to definitely read others and take your work outside and use that as a sounding board. Hopefully that's answered that question. The second question we've got come here is, wonderful conversation tonight. I'm so glad people are finding it, because I really felt at the beginning I was like, me and Afshan just have a catch up and no one's going to make sense of what we're talking about, but I'm so glad people are enjoying it. I know you're both super busy with your own works and project, but do you have any plans for a future collaboration? There are intersections in your work, and I think you both working on a piece together would be incredibly powerful. It's you nodding.
Yeah, I mean, I think we tried. We've kind of, I think the difficulty we have is that we're both working poets. We're both working writers. So we have like a gazillion other projects that happen at the same time. And Shagufta's based like, down south, and I'm based in the wonderful north. So there's a barrier of like literal time and energy to get there. I think we definitely could do something together. It'd be really fun, I think, to collaborate, because we've done a couple of shows together where we've brought in our own poetry. Actually, we've done quite a few shows together where we've brought in our poetry and done more of like a mashup. Or we've created, the first time that we performed together was What Will People Say? At the South Bank, Lodhi. And do you remember that was like, we only met that day. I think I met Amani the day before, and we performed the next day, and we'd been like on a Google Doc, like going back and forth, and been on like Google Hangouts and trying to work out how the show was going to work between like four poets, bringing in all new energies and new works to it. So I'd be up for it. And, I've quit my job now, so I'm free from the 1st of October. Yeah, I quit my job, so I'm free from the 1st of October to like do new collaborations. So yeah, let's definitely. Because I think we started off a point where we were very collaborative with our work and we're bringing it together. And it's at the time we kind of were quite new to poetry, and I think since then we were also doing things like platforming other voices and going, right, okay, we're South Asian poets, but there's more, and let's encourage more people. And we started doing the Universe Nights, Golden Tongue, and I think it did require a lot of our time, a lot of like traveling for us, and a lot was not paid for us off our own back. And so we did struggle to maintain that as our own careers and our own projects got bigger and bigger. And I think we've kind of got veered off into different directions. You're doing a lot of playwriting. I'm currently writing a debut novel. So I think when we come back, it's going to be interesting to see what's happened in that space where we've been away from one another's work. But I think... I was going to say collaboration plays a key role though in all of your work, though, because you're currently collaborating with a musician at the moment and creating stuff. How's that experience been for you?
I've loved it. I loved working with a musician because I suddenly realized how tone deaf I am, how awful I am. Somebody was saying to me, they were like, secretly all poets really want to be singers. Like if you could sing and you had a good voice, you wouldn't be a poet, you'd be a singer. And I was like, yeah, I totally want to be Beyonce. But because I can't, I am a poet. But it's been really, really good, like just working with the musician and understanding their practice, understanding how they come to their art, and just the processes. And I think as a poet, I'm very much about the words and the heaviness and just getting it out there. Whereas with working with a musician, he's very controlled and very calm, and it's about the gaps and the spaces and the way in which things come across. And I think that's really helped me with my own writing, because I realized suddenly I can still say the same things I want to say. It's not like it's being held here, but I can say it maybe in a slower way. I can say it in a different way. So I have enjoyed working with a musician. It's been really, really, really good. But yeah, the debut novel is happening at home in isolation, mostly in the shower when I'm like, oh, actually, that would be a really good storyline. And then when it comes to writing, I totally forgot what I was thinking about. Yes.
Well, so how is the novel going then? Have you finished it now? When can I read it?
People keep saying, have you finished it now?
That's like the worst question you can ask a novelist ever.
So when is it going to be done? So I have not finished it. I have not finished the novel. I'm thinking about joining a course, a writer's group, because I feel like I'm at a point where I need critical feedback now. So the novel is very much based around the refugee crisis and the impact of, well, I suppose, climate injustice on the world. And it's set on the island of Leros, which is a tiny Greek island. And it's a tiny, tiny Greek island, but it's got the entire world's population pretty much on it. You've got the refugees from Syria, from North Africa. You've got charity workers from parts of Europe and the US. You've got refugees, you've got volunteers, you've got NGOs, you've got the local population, and it's about human interactions. How do we come together in such a small space with such a diverse community and so many people with different demands, wants, needs, and the power imbalance between the different groups, and what motivates volunteers to go out there to volunteer. We're not all just there to be goody two shoes and help out. A lot of people are going there to search for something within themselves as well. So it's very much about human relationships and settling the small island. And again, it's about friendship. And I think that was really interesting what you were saying about the play about partition, because I think so often we're used to seeing work in terms of romantic relationships. And I think in recent years, a lot of people coming together and talking about what does friendship mean, because it's such a powerful support network you can have with friends who get you through some of the toughest times. And I think a lot of people want to explore friendship. What does it mean? How do we navigate friendships? How do we find our tribe, our community? I guess Neoniverse was kind of it was about that. It was like, how do we find poets who are like us, who get exactly what we're talking about without us having to explain ourselves? So yeah, that's kind of what the novel is about. I've got about 30%, 40% written. So it's still got to keep. I think it's different from writing a poem where you're like, okay, done, let's go to an open mic. This just needs you to just plod on and keep persevering. I've got another question here. It says from Parveen, she says, do you think book publishers are much more open to South Asian women voices and there is more opportunity now? What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, for sure. I think when we were doing Universe, that we could like name on our hand like all the South Asian female poets that we knew. And then we started doing Golden Tongue. We were like, oh my God, all these people, where are they coming from? This is great. I think there's, the London scene has definitely picked up. Manchester scene has picked up. I think everywhere, a lot of publishers are now understanding that not everything has to be in English. I use quite a lot of non-English words in my poetry. I think you do, Shagufta, as well. And Nafisa's title is called Bisharam. There's, and I think like Rupi, Rupinder also uses South, Desi words in her work. So I'm like, for me, I see an opening up of publishers kind of going, okay, not every poet has to look and sound like Keats or Shakespeare, or Percy Shelley. We can play around with form, we can play around with ideas, we can play around with language and languages. So I'm seeing that opportunity kind of move way more. And my day job, I work as a programmer for literature, and seeing the requests piling in for South Asian voices, and particularly women, and that understanding of like diversity and intersectionality becoming like key to all of our work, because we understand that actually, politics and poetry go hand in hand, and we can do a lot of political work and activism through our poetry. So yeah, I feel like it's opening up a lot more. What's your experience of it, Shagufta?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's opening up, but I think you've got to be careful about publishers as well. I mean, I'm always a big fan of Burning Eye Books. I think they're an incredible publisher. They are very much about let's get the voices into this room. I think there are a lot of I get the impression that there are a lot of maybe publishers are a bit lazy and required to already have a massive following, and they're like, oh, okay, this person's got a really big following. Yeah, they'll sell books. And so that kind of investment isn't going into the poets in the same way, which I think is problematic. I feel like there's been a really big discourse recently about how I think it was recently women of color, their voices were really shut down by the publishing industry, by big voices, and they were really kind of harassed and marginalized in a Twitter debate. And it was this whole conversation about who has ownership, whose voice is more important, and how exploitative is the publishing industry. So I think there's still big conversations to be had. I don't think it's always necessarily moving forward. I think you've got to be a bit savvy about which publishers you're approaching and looking at. But I think also the social media plays a role in it, because now if you haven't got a publisher coming to you, I know poets who are like, I'm self-published, and they sold more books than me because they've got a massive following on social media. And I think publishers can see that. They can see, okay, we're not necessarily in tune with or in touch with what's happening out there in the real world.
I think that's why, when I talk about publishers, I don't talk about the big five, because I'm like, I ignore them. They're corporations for me. Publishers for me are the independent publishers that do the work in supporting a lot of like Indigenous voices, a lot of people of color, a lot of people that have been historically underrepresented within the publishing sector. And, Burning Eye is a great example of that, just with like, within Universe, I think 5 of us or 4 of us are published with Burning Eye. So it's like, that's amazing to see so many South Asian women being published by a publisher. And we were all independently being published by Burning Eye before we'd even met at that point, I think, or, during the process. So there was definitely this, I can see it happening like in the independent circles, within the programming sector. I can see that happening. With the big five, they're for me, they're corporations. They work in the same way that banks do. I almost dismiss them, unless you're watching this, Penguin, in which case, like, hit me up and we'll have a chat.
Yeah, I'd be really easy to work with.
Just pay me the marketing money. Let me do it.
Thank you so much, Afshan. We've come to the end of our time. It's been so nice to catch you, and I've been following your journey while you've been in Mexico. I'm like, I can't wait for her to come back and talk about what she's been doing out there. So I want to, before this event finishes, I want to take a moment to thank, of course, Afshan for giving us her time and talking about her work. I want to thank you, the audience, for joining us and attending the session with us. I want to thank DESIblitz. I want to thank Fiona for making this happen, and the Online Literature Festival, which is supported also by the Arts Council England, who obviously I'm a big fan of, because I don't think I would survive as an artist without their very complicated, I'm going to add that in, application forms. But thank you for funding this project and making this happen. And of course, DESIblitz is always proactive in supporting arts and creativity, and you can find out more about how they do this and other events that they've got on as part of this this festival at their www.DESIblitz.com/arts. So they've got a couple more sessions on, and they've got some amazing writers. They had Nikesh Shukla. They've had
Satnam Sanghera. They've got a workshop with Rupinder coming up, I think.
Yes, there's a work, and that's a writing workshop. So those of you who are interested in writing, do join Rupinder, who's again a credible writer and writes bilingually, and taught herself Punjabi and writes in Punjabi poetry as well. So yes, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you again, Afshan. It's been lovely to see you, and hopefully I'll catch you at some of the other events.
Yes, and thank you, Shagufta, as well. Buy her book and follow her on social media.
Oh, you likewise do buy the winner of the Jalak Prize, according to Shagufta, Redesire, and you will read it and you'll realise that it should have been. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Fiona. Bye. Have a great evening.
Bye.